Part 2. Homecoming. 6. Luke cradled his daughter in his arms the whole way back to Manchester. To Isaac he looked to be in a state of disbelief. Understandable, given that the whole time he'd been gone, he'd assumed his unborn baby had died along with her mother, Brooke. Ben drove the Jeep that Randall had gifted them. Isaac rode shotgun. Indigo sat next to Luke in case he needed help with the baby. No one tried to make small talk. It didn't seem necessary, and Isaac knew his questions for Luke could wait. For the moment, Randall was keeping the captured members of the Brotherhood and housing the Willetton Green people. Luke had left a note for Diana, telling her he would come for them in 3 days. She had been operated on, but was still unconscious. Randall had told him that the doctors had removed the bullet and advised that she should recover without any serious repercussions. They agreed that Isaac and Luke would return to pick up Diana and her people and to discuss the fate of the captured brothers with Randall. Baby Aaron slept most of the drive back to Manchester, only beginning to stir when they reached the city limits. Isaac looked over his shoulder when the baby began to cry. He couldn't help laughing when he saw the look on Luke's face as he quickly held Aaron out to Indigo for rescue. "She's just hungry," said Indigo. "Do you want to feed her?" "No, it's okay," he said, almost pushing the baby into her arms. "I guess I'll watch the first time." Indigo smiled and took her from him, cooing and rocking Aaron as she expertly pulled a bottle from the insulated bag between her feet and began to feed the hungry baby. Luke watched carefully, like a kid watching his first science experiment, and Isaac had to remind himself that he'd been the same when Max had been born. "What's in the bottle?" Luke asked. "It's breast milk. Some of the mothers have been expressing milk for Aaron." "Is that safe?" he asked, his expression horrified. "Mate, it's perfectly safe," said Ben over his shoulder. "Much safer than cow's milk." Indigo laughed. "Don't worry. Uncle Ben was just as horrified as you when he found out." "I was not," grumbled Ben. Isaac mouthed, "He was." "When can she eat, like real food?" Luke asked. "At about 4 months we can start giving her pureed fruits and vegetables." Luke nodded but looked overwhelmed. Indigo put her hand on his wrist. "It'll be fine. We're all here to help." "Thanks. I have a feeling I'll need it." Indigo and Ben took Aaron upstairs when they arrived back in Manchester. The building they had made their home was just referred to as the Tower now, and Luke had been mobbed like a rock star when he arrived. As tired and sore as he was, he couldn't fail to be anything but overwhelmed by the reception. He doled out lots of hugs and answered as many questions as he could before Isaac dispersed the crowd. "Okay, everybody. Enough questions for now. We'll have a feast tomorrow night in celebration of Luke's return. Come on, everybody back to it." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, some going back inside and others milling around talking happily. Isaac began pointing out work they'd done on the outside of the building when Luke noticed a small figure standing and staring at him. Isaac interrupted his account of the work they'd been undertaking since he'd been gone. "I believe you've met Cade," he said. Luke stepped over to the kid and ruffled his hair. "Sure have. How are you doing, kiddo? You settled in okay?" The boy craned his neck to look up at Luke, the man he'd watched kill his father less than a month before. "I'm good, mister. Everyone has been real nice." Luke smiled. He looked like a different child to the dirty urchin he'd sent to Indigo before he left. His hair was clean and parted on the side, and he was wearing a worn but spotless pair of jeans and a white t-shirt. Aside from the clothes and cleanliness, though, there was something else. The kid looked happy. "Glad to hear it. Tell you what, go on and play with the other kids, and I'll come to find you later for some catch or something." "Sure," said Cade. "I'm glad you got back safe." The two men watched him go. "No troubles?" "No," said Isaac. "He seems to be a good kid, but we keep an eye on him. Hopefully he's young enough to forget the trauma of what he's seen and experienced." "Yeah, I hope so. What happened with the Marauders?" "I told Colonel Randall about the quick discussion I'd had with their general.
That Jared kid. He seemed straight up to me, so Randall had a team monitor Ashland for us. They seemed to have given up their aggressive ways and settled in to try and make a fist of it. Time will tell, I guess. He's due to come and meet with us in 2 more months, so we'll have a better idea then. In the meantime, Randall is keeping a close eye on them.
Luke nodded, then put his arm around his friend's shoulder. So, I like what you've done with the place. Show me more.
How's the leg holding up? You sure you don't want to rest?
It's sore. I'm okay for now, though. I might lay up for a while after we're done. For the next half hour, Isaac showed Luke, who walked with the aid of a beaten-up old crutch, around their compound. Using heavy machinery kindly lent to them by Concord, they had set up a perimeter around the Brady-Sullivan Tower, sealing off the roads in and out with blocks of granite taken from other parts of the city. Not enough to keep out anyone on foot, but enough to stop vehicles getting anywhere close. The compound was bordered by Elm Street in the east, River Road in the west, and north and south by West North Street and West Salmon Street.
It's a big area, but should be easy to defend once we get fences up. Jamal's crew is going to start working on that now that the granite blocks are in place.
We have electricity, I see. Randall again? Luke had noticed lights on in the foyer when they had arrived.
Yep, we wouldn't have made anywhere near the progress we have without their help. He reckons we should have running water within a month. Won't that be something?
Amazing. You know about the professor, then?
Yeah, said Isaac. I feel sorry for him, but he seems happy enough.
Well, he's still a genius, apparently.
He is. His latest project is a small oil refinery so that we can have gasoline and other stuff.
Seriously? Asked Luke. His interest piqued as he thought of a good use for fresh gasoline. That would be huge. There's so much oil in storage. If they can make it into gas, it would be a humongous advancement.
Well, apparently it's not so hard. They explained it to me, but it went in one ear and out the other. But if anyone can pull it off, it's the professor.
They went inside after that. The foyer had become a bit of a gathering ground for people. There were tables and chairs set up all across the floor, and in one corner a bunch of kids of various ages watched a cartoon movie on TV. Ava and Allie set that up for the kids. Of course, none of them had ever seen a movie before, let alone a working TV. They've watched the same 3 movies over and over again. I'm tempted to watch one myself. I never thought I'd see a movie again.
Confession. Isaac laughed. Indigo and I have been arguing over who gets to bring Max down to watch The Iron Giant.
No way, said Luke.
I love that movie. Playdate tonight, dude. I'll see if Ben will babysit Aaron, and I'll bring Cade. You bring Max. You're on. Are you ready to go up and see your room?
Sure, but it will take me an age to climb those stairs with this leg of mine.
We have power, remember? Isaac said, leading him to the elevator doors. Only one is working right now, but it's probably all we need for the time being. We've restricted it to people on the top 10 floors. Everyone else must use the fire stairs. You and Aaron are on the top story with us, between our room and Ben's.
Okay. Luke was silent on the way up, Isaac's words hammering home the fact that he would be living and raising his baby daughter on his own. Tears filled his eyes. Tears for Brooke, who never got to see her baby. Tears for Aaron, who would never know her mother. Tears for himself. Isaac sensed his friend's mood had darkened, and he pointed out the rooms and who they belonged to. It was a blur for Luke, who was unable to pay attention. They got to the room, and Isaac handed him the key. Thanks, man. Do you think Indigo would mind watching Aaron for a bit longer if I lay down for a while? My leg hurts like hell. Of course not, said Isaac. Take as long as you need. Just knock on our door when you're ready. Luke went in and closed the door. The converted office was spacious and had 2 single beds pushed together, along with some other furniture that had been taken from the hotel where they had spent the first few nights in Manchester. He leaned back against the door and looked up as his tears began to flow. After a few minutes, he went to the bed and lay down without taking off his boots. Despite the emotions and his sore leg, He fell into an exhausted sleep within 10 minutes. 7. Rochester, New York. The sun was shining as William Orton left the police building on Exchange Street and began the 10-minute walk to the Brown House on Church Street. That's what Aidan Riley had named the old City Hall building, and it had stuck. Orton thought it was stupid. Just as stupid as taking on the title of president and calling their flourishing nation-state New America. Still, he wasn't going to argue with him. Riley was president in name, but he was in fact a dictator. He'd become a leader through strength and aggression, and while not a tyrant, there was no doubt he was in charge. And William Orton was his right-hand man. In the 3 years since they had met, he had watched and helped Riley transform from a tough teen survivor who'd managed to pull together and lead a large group of survivors into the strong leader of a true nation-state. They had fallen into each other's orbits a year after the Chinese had been pushed back beyond the Mississippi. William and his crew had been forced to move on from their gingerbread house as bigger groups had begun to roam and loot the area around them. They had been a group of 3 when they left: him, Bo, and Ryan. He'd executed their 4th friend, Rodney, 6 months before. Always a little unstable, the kid had gone stir-crazy or something, and putting him down had seemed like the only option at the time. They grew to 20 after a month on the road. Orton knew that he needed numbers to survive, and willingly recruited people along the way to Lake Ontario. There was no real reason to go there, except that Ryan's grandfather had a cabin on 2 acres. Ryan said it was secluded and big enough to hide out on, given that it was half covered with forest. As a bonus, it had a fully stocked fallout shelter. His grandfather had been a well-known survivalist, not that it had done him much good. He'd had a heart attack 2 months before the attack. Orton's group made it west through Connecticut and were traveling north through New York State when they met an armed group of 25 men on horseback. Met wasn't really the right word. They were ambushed while they were walking along a 2-lane highway through the forest. The attackers had come upon them from all sides. They were quick and well-armed, and Orton and his people were surrounded before they could react. While William was no coward, the odds were too stacked against them to fight or run. "What business do you have in New America?" the leader of the group had asked. He was a fearsome-looking guy, with scar tissue running from high on his forehead and down over his empty left eye socket before finishing midway down his cheek. He wore a black tank top and pants. It was a warm day, and sweat ran down his muscled arms as he slowly brought his horse forward to stop a few feet in front of William. William had always been nervous of horses, and this one, carrying a man with a sword at his side and an AK-47 in his hands, was no different. "Sorry, I'm not sure what New America is," said William calmly, trying to show he wasn't intimidated. "We're just traveling north to Lake Ontario." He had a Glock pistol in his belt, and while not an ideal outcome, he was quite willing to use it if things looked like they were going ass up. He had done some craven things since the end of America, but he certainly wouldn't die like a coward. Their leader climbed out of his saddle and stepped up to William. "The state once known as New York is not called New America, and you're trespassing," said the one-eyed leader, looking up at the taller, crooked-nosed teen. William didn't bother consulting his nervous-looking traveling companions. Whatever the outcome, it would be decided by this one-on-one interaction. "We're sorry. We didn't realize. We can go back and take a different path." "No," said the other. "You're now prisoners of New America. You'll be taken to Albany, and the president will decide what to do with you." "The president?" "Yes, President Riley." "What?" William's puzzlement was clear. "Not the old president," their leader said. "Aidan Riley, his son. He's president now." "His son? Seriously?" It sounded extremely far-fetched, but then so did wiping out the entire adult population of a country with a virus. More importantly, they weren't to die today, at least not right there. "No more questions. You'll hand over your weapons and form a straight line. Don't try anything stupid. Anyone trying to run will be shot. No warnings."
"Do as he says,"
called William to his people. His curiosity had been piqued, and beside the fact that he really had no choice, he wanted to find out more. He pulled out his gun and carefully placed it on the road as several of the other horsemen collected the few pistols and shotguns the other in his group had given up. The one-eyed leader came back over to Orton when the weapons had been confiscated. William stuck out his hand.
"My name is William Orton. You are—"
"I'm Cyclops," the other teen said, ignoring William's hand and turning back to his horse.
"Of course you are."
"What's that?" said the leader, turning back to him with one foot in the stirrup. For a teenager with only one eye, his stare was intense.
"I said of course we'd love to come."
Cyclops glared at him a moment more, then finished mounting his horse. "Make sure your people keep up, or you're the one who will be punished." That had all happened in the very early days of New America, and Cyclops' statement that the old New York State was now New America had been optimistic at best. While Aidan Riley's group were by far the biggest group in New York, it was still a wild frontier with pockets of survivors scattered throughout. At that point, there was no way it could be described as a nation under one rule. Albany was impressive, though. The bridge across the Hudson was a well-armed checkpoint, and the inner city itself had been fenced and blocked to effectively form a walled semicircle south, north, and west, with the river providing a natural barrier to the east. The streets were crowded with people. William, who hadn't been in a crowd in a long time, found it almost overwhelming. This many people together in one place was more than he'd seen in the whole time since the invasion. Generally, they appeared happy and busy. There were lots of armed folk around, men and women. They wore mismatched clothes, but all in black. The people on the streets gave the procession plenty of attention, but steered clear of the horsemen. Eventually, they pulled up in front of a massive 3-story stone building. It had a portico held up by 6 marble arches, and no doubt had been a courthouse or something similar in its previous incarnation. There were more of the black uniformed guards milling around the steps. William counted at least 20. One came down the steps to greet Cyclops.
"What have you got?"
the man asked. The black beret he wore was the only thing that seemed to differentiate him from the rest of the guards. "Group we caught west of Salisbury," said Cyclops in a bored tone as he climbed down from his horse. "I'll take their leader in to see the president." The man in the beret looked William Orton up and down, then nodded.
"Okay, him only, and 2 of my boys will accompany you."
"Fine." Orton had the feeling the two had a history. "Come on." William followed Cyclops up the steps with 2 guards on either side of him. They entered a large marbled foyer that was manned by more of the guards, and then went up another flight of stairs and took a left along a mezzanine level. At a big set of wooden doors, they were greeted by 2 more guards. "What's up, Cyclops?" said the one on the right, a muscular black kid with a deep voice. "Hey, Bennett, I have a captive to see the president. He's kind of busy with something." "Well, you know the rules. Any group we catch larger than 10, he wants to talk to the leader." Bennett looked at William, then back at Cyclops. "How many?" 20 exactly." "Okay, wait here." Bennett opened one of the doors and slipped in, closing it quietly behind him. William didn't bother making small talk with Cyclops. He was about to meet the real deal, so why waste breath on a belligerent underling? Instead, he took the opportunity to look around the old courthouse. He wondered what kind of justice was being served by its new owners. He was about to find out. The doors opened after a few minutes, and they were ushered into a courtroom. The seats in the public gallery, along with the defendants' and plaintiffs' tables, had been removed. It left the cavernous room empty, except the jury box and the judge's bench. There were only 2 guards in the room. They were facing the front and stood on either side of a boy of about 14. The kid had his head bowed, and William noted that one of the guards next to him held a samurai sword. In front of them was a large metal brazier packed with glowing coals. The smoking embers cast the faces of the three in an orange glow. To the right, 3 girls sat in the jury box. They were all around William's age and wore makeup and what could only be described as revealing clothing. His entrance seemed to pique their interest, and they watched him like cats who had just eaten their fill watching a mouse, too full to pounce but unable to tear their eyes away from a potential meal. William let his eyes travel to the judge's bench. A tall teen sprawled on the big leather chair, his booted feet crossed on top of the bench. He held a wooden gavel in his hand and was tapping it on his thigh. His face was hard, and his brown hair shorn to stubble, but there was no doubt in William's mind. This was Aiden Riley, son of the last president of the United States. "Don't be shy. Come on down," he said. Cyclops exited and pulled the doors shut. The guard called Bennett accompanied William as they headed towards the front. "You might want to give my boy some space. Why don't you stand over by the wall until this matter's sorted?" William nodded and headed to the wall opposite the jury box shadowed by Bennett. "Where were we?" Aiden Riley asked the boy in front of him. "Oh, yes. You stole a loaf of bread. That makes you an asshole. What do we do with assholes who steal, girls?" "Chop off their hand," called the girls in the jury box as one. "Yes, that's right. And we know he's guilty because he confessed." "Correct." The boy began to cry. "Oh, look, it won't kill you, son, but you must learn from this. After all, you know the 2-strike rule for petty crimes, don't you?" The kid sniffled and nodded. "Say it." One strike, lose your hand. 2 strikes, lose your life." "That's right." "Okay, let's get this over with." One of the guards grabbed the kid's arm and pushed it out in front of him. The other turned to face him, hefting the sword in his hand. The kid struggled, but the man holding him was too strong. William Morton watched, fascinated, but unmoved. He was, after all, a sociopath. "Please," bawled the kid, as the sword was raised high. "I'm sorry, I won't." The blade flashed, and the kid's hand fell onto the timber floor of the courtroom with a soft plop. Amazingly, he didn't scream, just looked down at the hand with a surprised look on his face. He didn't have time to contemplate it long. The guard holding him put an arm across his chest and shoved the bloody stump into the glowing embers of the brazier. The kid shrieked in agony as blood and flesh sizzled before passing out from the pain. The stench of burned meat assaulted William's nose. He noted that the girls who had pronounced sentence so gleefully just a few minutes before now looked a little off color. "There we go," said Riley in a regretful tone. "Okay, take him out. Let's hope he's learned his lesson." The guard picked the boy up and slung him over his shoulder before taking him past the judge's bench and through a door in the back wall. The man with the sword picked up the severed hand and put it in a Hessian bag attached to his belt. "Right," said Riley. "Let's get on with it, shall we? You can come forward." Accompanied by Bennett, William confidently strode to the spot where the guy who had picked up the hand was now wiping up the blood with a rag. William was nervous but didn't let it show. Riley smiled down at him. He smiled back. "Something funny?" William's smile disappeared. He was on dangerous ground. "No, sir. Just being friendly." "I see," said Riley, nodding. "Not enough of that these days. So, what's your name and where are you from, Mr. Friendly?" This drew a titter from the girls in the jury box. "William Morton. I'm from Massachusetts." "Massachusetts? You're a long way from home." "Yes, sir. It's been quite a hike." "Why aren't you still in Massachusetts?" "It became too dangerous. We were only a small group, and there were gangs springing up everywhere." Aiden Riley weighed him up a moment. "How many were in his group, Bennett?" 20. 20, he said to William. "That's not a small group."
Why are you traveling through my country with a group of 20? We were only 3 when we started out. We took people in as we traveled. We were headed to Lake Ontario. We didn't realize we were trespassing. You seem fairly unscathed by your experiences, said Riley, looking him up and down. Still well fed, too, considering you've been on the road so long.
William nodded.
How? Why aren't you a thin, ragged refugee?
Now it was William's turn to weigh up Riley. Lie or truth? He went with the truth.
I made a deal with the devil.
Riley's feet came off the bench and he straightened in his seat.
Tell me more, sport. What deal, and with which devil? The Chinese. I'm not proud of it, but we were about to be put in a chain gang.
Riley held up his hand, and from the corner of his eye he saw the girls in the jury box lean forward eagerly.
What deal? I offered to trap kids who were on the run from them. Kids they were having difficulty rounding up. My 3 friends and I had been hiding out in my grandmother's house. It was big and comfortable and on the main highway. We saw lots of kids going past. I came up with the idea on the spur of the moment. I was desperate. I see. And did you deliver?
William looked at the floor and nodded.
Anything else? They gave us food and weapons. So let me get this straight, said Riley sharply. To keep your own ass out of the fire, you offered to trap your fellow survivors and hand them over to the Chinese for a lifetime of servitude or death.
William's heart began to pound, sure now that he'd made a terrible mistake. Riley turned to the 3 girls in the jury box.
What do you say, members of the jury? Is he guilty or not guilty of being a traitorous asshole? Guilty, they called as one. And what do we do with traitors? Chop off their head.
Riley nodded, looking regretful. William tensed, and the man holding the sword smiled at him.
Luckily for you, said Riley, looking at him, I make the decisions around here. While I think you're guilty of being an asshole and a traitor, it wasn't me you betrayed. Mr. Friendly, I respect survivors, especially ruthless survivors. Here's the deal. Your group can stay or go. However, if they choose to go, they'll be shot. That's the way New America works. You join or you die. You, though, I think you might be too dangerous to let loose in my city without someone to watch over you. What do you say about joining my guard? I'm always looking for ruthless assholes who can think quick on their feet.
Having been sure his life was about to end moments before, a surprised William took a second to realize he was being given a reprieve. Not only a reprieve, but a job.
Yes, he said after he gathered himself. You won't find a more ruthless asshole than me. I promise. Excellent. Welcome to New America, William.
William Orton kept his promise and then some. He had quickly worked his way up through the ranks of Riley's guard and had eventually been awarded the title of general, the commander of the entire army of New America. It was an army now. Since Orton had arrived 3.5 years before, it had grown from just over 100 poorly armed boys and girls to more than 3,000 strong. They had 3 tanks, trucks, and 200 horses. Orton, it seemed, had a knack for conquest. He had taken Aidan Riley's dream to create a new America and had channeled it into concrete action. His ruthlessness, coupled with a talent for organization and strategy, complemented Riley's expansive ambitions. They hadn't outgrown Albany, but Orton had convinced the president that Rochester was more easily defensible and a larger, more suitable capital for New America. Besides moving their capital, they had conquered the rest of old New York State and started making inroads to the neighboring states of Massachusetts and Vermont. So far it had been easy. Their army was far superior to anything even the largest settlement had to offer. Generally, these settlements were just ragged pockets of undisciplined rabble, living like peasants in their own filth. Those that chose to lay down their arms and be absorbed into New America didn't regret their decision long, and it always puzzled President Riley when they resisted. Orton liked it better when they chose to fight, though. He always led the attack and kept a bloody tally of his kills, 290 at last count. As he walked up the steps to the Brown House, a Romanesque castle-like structure that would have looked at home in a field surrounded by a moat, William knew Riley would be as excited by the information they had obtained from the captive as he was. It would now be his job to keep a lid on that enthusiasm and make sure they did their homework before rushing headlong into what could be their first serious opposition.
Army? That can't be right. He was lying to you. They were wiped out when the flu hit.
I don't think so, said Orton. He was annoyed that Riley had kept him waiting for 10 minutes, but hid it well. We'd broken him by that point. He claims that the core of their personnel is a contingent that was inside an underground military facility.
You trust what he told you?
Asked Riley. Not fully, but men broken like that usually only spill the truth.
Tell me everything.
They have a population of around 500, but at least 350 can be called upon to fight. From what he said, they're well armed and trained. Their leader is called Randall, a colonel. They have running water and electricity courtesy of a man he called the Professor. It's a small operation, but they're taking in refugees and slowly growing.
Electricity, we have that.
It's nothing, but running water, that's very desirable. The electricity isn't just from portable generators like ours, sir. They have an entire power station up and running, which is exactly how they pump their water. Riley's eyes widened, and Orton could see his leader's brain working overtime.
We must make the offer to them. This Professor sounds invaluable, and Concord sounds like the perfect staging point for our expansion to the East Coast.
Orton knew by offer he meant ultimatum. I agree. How do you want to proceed, sir?
Well, now that your men have slaughtered and tortured their scouting party, an envoy would seem to be out of the question. Still, we can deny any knowledge. I would rather take the city intact, and I'm sure they'll be willing to swear allegiance when they understand we can crush them if they fight. Might I suggest sending our own scouting party with strict instructions not to engage first? It would pay to size them up before giving the ultimatum.
Yes, all right, said Riley after thinking for a few seconds.
I guess we're in no rush, and a clearer picture of what we're dealing with would help.
Yes, sir. I'll organize it right away. Riley watched his general go. He was aware that William Orton didn't always agree with his decisions or the way he ran things. He didn't care. The fact was, Orton was a big part of the reason they were where they were today. His strategic thinking had been crucial to their rapid expansion, and Riley was careful to heed his advice. The downside was, the man had a cruel streak and bore careful watching. Minutes before Orton arrived, one of Riley's spies had already informed him of the death of the Concord man and everything he told Orton. He also knew Orton had stayed to watch the man die. Yes, Orton had his secrets, but so did Riley. One of them was the fact that Riley had ordered a tunnel from the Brown House to the secret police headquarters be built. It hadn't been dug from scratch, but his hand-selected team had made clever use of the old sewers, only having to dig through 3 sections to fashion a tunnel that ran almost directly from one building to the other. Yes, best to keep an eye on things. No one was 100% reliable. 8. 2 days after Luke's homecoming, he and Isaac were traveling back to Concord. Luke had spent those days getting to know his daughter, and was surprised at the depth of emotion he felt now at leaving her for just a few hours.
"It's okay, Luke. I'll look after her, and I have Uncle Ben to keep me in line, okay?" Indigo had told him. "Go. Have fun."
After another 2 minutes of instructions and hugs and kisses, Isaac had finally dragged him through the door. Isaac drove to Concord in the Jeep. They had a meeting scheduled with Randall to discuss the captured members of the Brotherhood. Luke also wanted to pay a visit on Diana and find out how long before she was fit enough to move to Manchester. He didn't say as much to Isaac, but he was also looking forward to seeing Becky, the Colonel's PA, again. As for the brothers, he had mixed emotions about how to deal with them. While he knew they couldn't all be bad, the only experience he'd had with them was that they were either killers or following the orders of killers. There was a new checkpoint on the road into Concord with 2 armed guards stationed at a boom gate. Orange water barrels blocked the sidewalk on both sides of the road.
"What's this?"
asked Isaac as he pulled up. "No idea," said Luke. One of the guards, a fresh-faced kid who could have been no older than 17, came over. "Hello, sirs," he said, clearly recognizing them.
"Morning. We're here to see the Colonel."
"Yes, sir. We were told about your visit. You can drive on through."
"What's with the new checkpoint?"
Isaac asked him as the other guard raised the boom gate. "Colonel's orders, sir," he said. "They're on all the major roads in, north, south, and west."
"Do you know why?"
The kid looked like he was going to say something, but then changed his mind. "It's above my pay grade, sir."
"Okay, then. Thanks. See you on the way out,"
said Isaac, heading through the checkpoint and into town. They noticed more activity as they drove, side streets being barricaded, people in a park filling sandbags with soil.
"Looks like he's preparing for an invasion," said Isaac.
"Maybe the scouting party Randall sent east is back." While security on the roads had been beefed up, they walked into Randall's headquarters without anyone stopping them. Luke led the way up to the 3rd floor, his leg and crutch making it slow going. Becky was behind her desk, just as he had imagined. She looked up as they approached. "Luke," she said, standing up from behind her desk. She was dressed, as she had been last time, in a black skirt and white blouse, but her hair, rather than being pulled back in a tight bun, was down and fell over her shoulders in soft waves. "Hi, Becky."
"I heard you were back," she said, meeting him and giving him a brief hug. "You were the talk of the town the other day. How is your leg?"
"It's okay. Hopefully I'll get rid of this crutch in a few days," he said, then thought back to his rescue and being reunited with Aaron. "Yeah, the other day was all a bit of a blur. Sorry I didn't get to see you. You know Isaac?"
"I sure do. We met when he came to visit the Colonel last time. Hi, Isaac,"
she said, and held out her hand. Isaac shook it.
"Hey, Becky, is the boss in?"
"Sure is.
1 sec."
Becky turned and knocked on the door. Luke pretended not to notice Isaac looking at him curiously.
"Isaac Race and Luke are here, sir."
"Show them in,"
came the gruff voice. Becky held the door open for them. Luke felt his face heat up as he squeezed past the smiling girl. Randall came around the desk and shook both their hands as Becky closed the door behind them.
"Have a seat, boys. How are things going in your neck of the woods?"
"Pretty good," said Isaac. "The tower is fully populated now, and we've been working on our defenses. Speaking of..."
"The checkpoints. Seems a bit of overkill given how well defended we are, I guess."
He looked troubled.
"The team I sent east to scout and find out more about this army is a week overdue. I thought it might be time to plan for the future."
"Maybe they're just delayed?" said Isaac.
"No, not these guys,"
said Randall, his face a little pinched.
"If they were physically able to, Branson would have had them back. No, a week means they've been intercepted, and I have to assume the worst."
"No comms, obviously."
"No. Sat phones are useless junk since the Chinese took control of our tech during the invasion. We have walkie-talkies and CB radio, but obviously they were out of range."
"You think they've been killed?"
"Captured at the least. Maybe killed. I'm assuming a worst-case scenario."
"Which also means you have to assume they might have been interrogated," said Luke. Randall nodded.
"Are you sending another team?"
asked Isaac.
"Yes, I liked your tactic of the boys on the motorcycles when you were dealing with the marauders. It was clever. So this time I'm sending Bowman and another man. 2-person tag team. I want intel this time, so they're under strict instructions to return once they have something to report, or in the case of a troop movement, to get their asses back here ASAP."
You really think this new America is that aggressive? Asked Isaac. It seems a long way to come.
If what I've heard is correct, they will come. They hold sway over the entire state of New York. More concerning is that they have a large presence in Albany. Apparently it was their first capital. I'll send Bowman and the other man to watch the main route between Rochester and Albany. I assume if they make a move, they'll head from Rochester to Albany first, then make that their staging point if they do decide to cross Vermont and come after us.
Hopefully they stay on their side of the border, said Luke.
We'll see. Now, how do you boys want to deal with the 7 prisoners?
I'll let Luke tell you his idea,
said Isaac. I think we should send them back, said Luke. I'd like to talk to the one who ordered them to surrender. He saw Brother Jared had betrayed them, and while I don't like the way they do things, I think if we allow them to return with a message that we're not looking for a fight, it will be one less thing to worry about.
Good plan, son. They've been treated well since they surrendered, so I don't think there'll be any complaints. They're in cells at the PD. When do you want to do it?
Now's as good a time as any, I guess, he said, waving vaguely in the direction of the police department that was 2 doors down. It's close.
Yes, I'll come with you. Maybe my gray hair will lend some authority to the situation.
A short time later, one of Randall's men opened the door of the first cell. It contained the one called Simon and 3 more. Simon stood when the door opened, his eyes widening when Luke, leaning on his crutch, filled the doorway. The other men stood up, alarmed. "It's okay, boys," he said, holding up his good hand. "I'm only here to talk."
"What do you have to say?"
said Simon, taking a step toward him. "I have an offer for you, but let's go somewhere more amenable to conversation." A minute later, Luke led Brother Simon into the conference room of the station where Isaac and the uniformed colonel waited. Simon stopped in his tracks when he spotted the old man. While he'd seen that some of the soldiers were in their 30s, he hadn't seen anyone with gray hair in nearly 6 years.
"You look like you just spied a ghost, son. Take a seat."
"He kind of did," said Luke, as Simon sat down. "Not many of you elders around anymore."
"Sorry," said the still shocked brother. "I haven't seen anyone really old since before."
Randall laughed as Isaac and Luke suppressed giggles.
"Well, there are a few of us around," he said. "More here in Concord than you're likely to see on the entire continent. But let's get to it. Luke?"
Luke sat down at the head of the table and looked at Simon earnestly. "We're letting you go."
"I see,"
said Simon after the words had sunk in.
"But—"
"No buts, just a proviso. You're free to head back to your people, but we want you to give a message to your leadership. Stay in Maine. No revenge attacks. No mischief this side of the border. You've seen our firepower here. We have an army of more than 1,000 men." Luke ignored the quick look Isaac gave him. "Understood?"
"You're letting us go?"
asked Simon, perhaps more used to the Brotherhood's version of justice. "Yes. We're willing to let bygones be bygones, even after the pain and suffering you caused for the people of Willetton Green. But any aggression from the Brotherhood will be met with fire and fury. Is that clear?"
"Yes, sir,"
said Simon.
"I'll be sure and tell them how well we were treated, too."
Luke nodded and held his hand out to the younger man. They shook.
"Excellent," said
Randall, standing up.
"Now that is settled, I'll see you on your way with some supply packs."
Simon stood. He flinched when Randall put a big paw on his shoulder and squeezed as he directed him through the door.
"Don't let us down, son."
After they'd gone, Isaac looked at Luke.
1,000 men? Fire and fury?
Luke grinned. "Well, it doesn't hurt to embellish details a little. Was fire and fury too much? I was going to go with shock and awe, but I've always been a fan of alliteration. Friends will flip-flop fast when facing trouble."
"Come on,"
said Isaac, shaking his head happily. Clearly the old Luke was on his way back.
Let's go see your friends."
Diana was on the mend and happy to see Luke. Samuel was being looked after by Kathy in a wing of the hospital that had been set aside for accommodation. He got to see his mom every day. "So, you haven't changed your mind about coming to live in Manchester?" he asked. "I mean, they're a bit more advanced on the road to civilization here in Concord."
"No, not at all. Besides, Sammy would kill me if I told him we weren't going to go and live with Uncle Luke. That kid idolizes you."
"Can you blame him?" Luke joked.
"No, I can't,"
she said seriously. Isaac rolled his eyes at Luke's aw shucks face. They made small talk for 20 minutes before Isaac and Luke stood up. "The medic says you'll be fit for travel in a few days. We'll be back to take everyone then." He leaned over and kissed her on the cheek.
"Okay," she said as they headed to the door. "And Luke, thanks again for everything."
"No sweat. I'll see you in a couple of days." 9. Luke eased into his new life as a father with a lot of help. Indigo, Ben, and Diana were his main support when it came to Aaron, and while tentative in the first few weeks, within a month he couldn't have imagined how life was before she arrived. Diana and her group had been transported to Manchester as soon as she'd been fit enough for travel. Luke had insisted upon it. Diana and Samuel had moved in on the top floor with the rest of the core members of Isaac and Luke's original group, in a room next to Ben. Like Luke, who had discarded his crutch after a week, her wound had healed nicely, and apart from stiffness in her back on cold mornings, she appeared unaffected by her ordeal. In fact, the weight of the world looked to have been lifted from Diana's shoulders since her arrival, and Luke realized how much being responsible for the people of Willetton Green had worn her down. She looked years younger and just plain happier than the taciturn, jaded woman he'd had the good fortune to meet the night the dogs had attacked him. To his great satisfaction, she and Ben also seemed to have hit it off. While he and Isaac had spoken of the obvious attraction between the two, so far it hadn't bloomed into anything other than friendship. They were careful to avoid the usual ribbing they might have given their English friend. Hopefully it would morph into something more in its own time. As a bonus, Samuel and Cade had become good friends, and by the end of their first month, Cade had been adopted and moved in to live with Diana and Samuel. In late September, 6 weeks after Luke's return, they had their first council meeting since populating the Brady Sullivan. They met in a large conference room on the 19th floor. The first item on the agenda was voting for the 3-member leadership team. "I nominate Isaac," said Luke automatically. "I second that vote," said Ben. "And I also nominate Luke for the leadership team." "I second both of those votes and nominate Diana for the 3rd position," said Indigo. "Oh, I don't—" Diana was interrupted by Paul, Allie, and Ava. "Second." "Anyone else?" asked Paul, who was chairing the meeting. "I nominate Paul," said Diana, finally recovering from the shock of being nominated. She had been watching Paul and his organization skills as he oversaw the population of the building and allocation of jobs, and thought he was great leadership material. "No," said Paul, immediately reddening at the sudden attention. "Sorry, I'm not really a leader. These guys definitely are, and you too, by all accounts." No one else was nominated, and the 3 were voted to the leadership group with no dissenters. "Next on the agenda is birthdays," said Paul. "Indigo?" "Thanks, Paul," said Indigo, standing up. "Well, some of you mightn't be aware, but Isaac turned 21 while we were on the run from the farm. He made me swear not to remind anyone, but now that we've settled into our new home, I think it's time to celebrate. Not only that, but Luke is also turning 21 on November 10th. There were oohs and ahs from the rest of the people around the table. The boys just looked embarrassed. "We don't need to—" started Isaac. "Yes, we do," said Indigo. "I propose we have a 21st birthday celebration party on the roof of the tower on the 10th of November. A chorus of seconds followed. Neither of the boys was fond of the idea, but they were outvoted 11-2. "Fine," said Luke in the end. He was more of a showman than Isaac, and the idea of being the center of attention began to grow on him almost immediately. Isaac was watching him as the hands went up around the table, and just shook his head laughing as he watched his friend's face change from reluctant to supremely happy in the space of a few seconds. "What?" Luke mouthed. Isaac just shook his head and conceded the party would go ahead. The rest of the agenda covered more mundane topics, such as the continuing work on their new home. "Jamal, do you have an update on the power situation?" Paul asked. "I sure do. It's good news. The team that Colonel Randall sent last week has gotten everything ready with repairs, but came across something we couldn't fix. The professor arrives tomorrow, and he should be able to kick the plant into gear within a few hours. When it's done, we can move off the generators and can distribute power to the whole Manchester grid as we get bigger."
"Wow, that's awesome," said Isaac. "Even better that we have a hydro-powered plant so close."
"Yeah, the Merrimack River turned out to be a real bonus. It has power plants dotted right along it. That's also how they power Concord."
"So we'll have the water plant going too?"
"A part of the team has already headed over there. Once the power is on, they can start up the pumps and filtration. It will be a few days before it's clean enough to drink without boiling, though."
"And the sewer?"
asked Allie, her nose wrinkled. "Well, it's connected," said Jamal. "So yeah, that will be on too."
"Oh, wow. It will be so strange," said Indigo.
"Yeah," agreed Luke. "Just in time for winter. Oh, I forgot, Luke. The fuel and car battery you requested will be arriving with the professor."
"What's this?"
asked Isaac. "You'll see," said Luke mysteriously. The rest of the meeting covered some general housekeeping business and broke up 20 minutes later.
"Seriously, what's the gas in the battery for?"
asked Isaac as they headed out of the conference room. "Oh, just a little project." Isaac's shoulder bumped him.
"Come on, you're not going to tell your best friend?"
"Oh, leave him alone, Isaac. If I know Luke, whatever it is won't be a secret for long," said Indigo with a laugh. "There," said Luke. "Your boss has spoken. Now excuse me, I have to relieve Ava. She's been babysitting Aaron and the rest since before dinner." They took the stairs as they were only one flight down from their floor. Luke led the way with Isaac and Indigo following. Diana and Ben followed behind, more slowly. "Great meeting, huh?" said Diana. "As far as meetings go, I guess," Ben said. Diana giggled. "What?" he asked. "I was just thinking how lame that attempt at making small talk was. Great meeting. Wow, I need to work on my social skills." He laughed. "No lamer than my answer," he said, then mocked himself in a BBC accent. "As far as meetings go." "You did sound a bit famous five," she laughed. "Oh," he said, surprised. "You know them? You read Enid Blyton?" "Well, yeah, my friend had the whole collection. We used to giggle over the names, you know, Dick and Fanny." He laughed. "They're really old-fashioned now, but I loved them when I was a kid. They were great adventures." "Yeah, actually, you remind me of how Julian might have looked. You know, tall and blonde and handsome. All you need is a striped jersey." Ben's cheeks burned at this unexpected compliment, and he focused on the steps as they reached the top of the fire stairs. The others had already disappeared through the door to the top floor. Ben paused with his hand on the door handle. I was wondering if you'd like to go up on the roof later. You know, after the kids are asleep." "The roof?" "If you want," he stammered, "just to look at the stars and talk." "I'd love to." "Shall I knock on your door when it's all clear?" she said in a British accent. "That would be nice," he said, smiling. "It's a date." On the western side of the Merrimack River, a group of 3 armed men was hiding out in a condominium overlooking the large waterway. They were situated directly west of the Brady Sullivan Tower, and from their top-story room were able to see the upper portion of the tower unimpeded. They also had a man on the roof. Their leader was Dan Eshman, a 20-year-old from Albany who had joined the ranks of the new American Army 4 years ago. He was tough and competent. He'd been raised with guns, and his father had been a Marine. When the president's son and his army had risen up to start taking back control of New York State, it had been a no-brainer to fall in with them. Dan had risen through the ranks quickly and was now head of the Special Ops team. They did all the reconnaissance and forward probing for New America, and what they had seen on this mission made the rest of their missions pale into insignificance. They had reconnoitered and studied Concord for over 3 weeks, and it had been the most difficult assignment yet. The city was well armed and patrolled. The level of sophistication of their security meant that the team had only been able to operate on the edges of the city and in the dark. They had learned enough to take back some very disturbing intel regarding the size of the settlement and their manpower. It was only a fluke that they'd spotted a few vehicles heading south out of Concord the day before. They'd been about to return home, but given he'd been ordered to take his time and make sure they covered every angle, he had thought it might be worthwhile tracking them. It had been. Not only would he be confirming that Concord was better organized and defended than any settlement or enclave they'd attempted to take before, but that they'd expanded to Manchester. At this stage, the southern city didn't appear as populated or well defended, but one had to assume it was on the agenda. The walkie-talkie on Eshman's hip hissed. "Echo Foxtrot Charlie, we have movement on the roof, over." He put down the plate of beans he had heated over the small butane cooker and snatched up the walkie-talkie. "Roger, Hawk 1. What do you see, over?" he said, picking up his M24 sniper rifle and heading to the balcony. "Lights on the roof, along with 2 targets, male and female, over. I have a clean shot." "Negative, Hawk 1. You know the orders, Bruno. Observe and await instructions, over." Eshman put the walkie-talkie back on his belt and slid the glass door open, wondering if it was time to put someone else on lookout duty. Bruno was a novice and keen as hell to shoot someone. This was the wrong mission for him. The cold night air hit Eshman like a hard slap. He knelt beside the rail and put the stock of his M24 to his shoulder and peered into the scope. 430 yards away, the roof of the Brady Sullivan was lit up like a Christmas tree. The couple was easy to spot, even though from his vantage he could only see from their shoulders up. They had drifted to the southern end of the roof and were looking over the city. He focused the scope and took a closer look. One was a tall male, the other a dark-haired woman. Both appeared to be around 20 and were unarmed. They leaned over the rail and chatted. From his end of the rifle scope they looked carefree and happy. Eshman scanned the rest of the roof to make sure no one else was around. By the time he'd swung his scope back to the couple, he found them engaged in a kiss. "How romantic," he said under his breath and took his eye away from the scope before heading back inside. "Hawk 1, he said into his walkie-talkie. "No threat, just a couple of lovebirds. Keep an eye on them. An eye only. Understand, Bruno?" "Roger, Echo Foxtrot Charlie." "Good. I'm going to get some shut-eye. Over." Eshman sensed the disappointment in the voice of his man on the roof. He understood it. His team was used to a more hands-on style when reconnoitering, and Bruno was on his first mission. He was a skillful marksman and a good kid, but way too gung-ho. Still, the order was to gather intel and under no circumstances engage unless their hand was forced, and that's exactly what they would do. On the spur of the moment, he decided to go up on the roof and give Bruno a quick pep talk before he rested. On the roof, Bruno Giuliano kept his rifle trained on the couple. He was frustrated. This was his first mission, and after hearing stories of killing and glory on their previous missions from the other men, this one was plain boring. In fact, it was a fucking letdown. Feeling pissed, he put his finger back on the trigger and peered through the night. The crosshairs of the sight split the back of the guy's blonde head into quadrants as he kissed his girl. They wouldn't know what hit them. With one shot, he could take both of them so easily. Recklessly, he squeezed the trigger ever so slightly. "You're a good kisser," said Diana, breaking away from Ben and leaning back over the rail as she took a breath. "You too." He smiled, pleased, and joined her at the rail,
looking back over the dark city. "So, I'd really like to see you again," said Ben.
Diana laughed, and Ben's face fell, wondering what he'd said wrong.
"Sure," she said, and put her hand on his. "Me too. You're very nice. Very British. Shall we go on a date?" "Yes, I'd like that." "Me too." "Well, I guess we better go in." "Yes," he said as they turned from the rail. He put his arm out and was taken aback when Diana ignored it and leaned in to kiss him again. Her lips had only just met his when the crack of a gunshot shattered the silent night. 10. When Eshman emerged onto the roof of the building, it took a while for his eyes to adjust to the dark. He spotted Giuliano, a dark shadow against the low wall that edged the flat rectangular roof. He was laid out full length, shoulders tense, his eye against the scope of his rifle. Eshman began sprinting silently across the roof, glancing across the river as he closed in quickly on his team member. Even from this distance he could see the silhouettes of the couple on the roof of the Brady Sullivan. Time seemed to slow as he turned his attention back to Giuliano. The kid's finger was on the trigger. Eshman dived. "Did you hear that?" Indigo asked Isaac. He was busy horsing around with Max on the carpeted floor of their apartment. "Huh?" "A bang." The words were no sooner out of her mouth when there was an urgent rapping on their door. Isaac flipped his laughing son onto his back and stood up, running to the door. It was Luke, his hair wild. "That was a gunshot," he said, waving a pistol in the general direction of the river. "I think Ben and Diana are on the roof. Come on." Isaac looked back at Indigo as Luke ran for the fire stairs. "Go," said a pale Indigo. Isaac barreled at the door, only remembering he was unarmed as he entered the stairwell and began chasing Luke the one flight of stairs to the roof. No time now. The door was open when he got to it, and the big switch that controlled the lighting on the roof was switched to the off position. Luke was down on his haunches a few feet out onto the roof, peeking cautiously around a large air-conditioning box. 30 feet away, 2 figures lay unmoving on the tar-sealed roof. Eshman struck Giuliano hard in the side. The rifle spat death with a loud report as his momentum rolled him over. Eshman's ears rang painfully as he wrestled the other man onto his back and punched him hard in the cheek. The kid released his rifle and held his hands up to protect his face. "What the fuck, Giuliano?" "I wasn't going to shoot, boss. I was only playing." "You took a shot, asshole." "I was just testing the trigger to see how it felt. It only went off 'cause you surprised me." Eshman shook his head, barely able to refrain from punching him again. There was no time to waste. Whether he'd meant to shoot or not, he had, and they needed to be gone. He pulled Giuliano roughly to his feet by the collar and glanced across to the tower in the distance. The couple was nowhere to be seen. Before he turned away, the lights on the roof went black. "Grab your gun. We have to pull out right now." Luke, with his heart in his mouth, crouched and ran as fast as he could to where Ben and Diana were sprawled. Isaac followed close behind. "Some bloody bastard shot at us," called Ben, popping his head up as the two arrived. "Oh, Jesus," said Luke, falling to his knees next to them. "I thought you were dead." "No, they missed us. It hit over there," said Diana, pointing to the wall that ran parallel to Elm Street. From the angle of her gesture, the shot hadn't missed by much. "What direction did it come from?" asked Isaac. Ben pointed west. "From across the river, I think." "Come on," said Isaac. "Let's get inside." All 4 of them stayed low and made their way back to the open door before racing down the steps to the top floor. The door to Isaac's room opened and Indigo came out to meet them. She was in jeans and a jacket with a pistol tucked in her belt. She carried another. "I have Ava and Allie watching Samuel, Cade, and Max," she said, handing Isaac his Glock. "What happened?" "Someone fired at Ben and Diana from across the river while they were on the roof," said Luke. "Right. Are we going to investigate?" "Yes," said Isaac, moving to the elevator and pressing the down button. "Ben, you and Diana take the stairs and grab Jamal from the 5th floor. Meet us down in the lobby. We'll have weapons waiting. Hurry." Luke, Isaac, and Indigo stepped into the elevator. "You think it's a loner?" asked Indigo. "No idea," said Isaac. "We'll take 2 semi-automatics in case." "Yeah, we should probably go on foot. They'll hear the Jeep coming a mile off."
4 minutes later, the 6-person group was crossing the bridge at a cautious sprint.
"I can't be sure, but I think it came from the direction of those buildings," said Ben, pointing at the row of structures that lined the western riverbank. "Okay, we'll head there."
Isaac paused in the shadows on the other side of the bridge.
"Luke, you, Ben, and Diana go around the front. Jamal, Indigo, and I will enter from the rear. We'll check the buildings one by one. It will take a while, but we have to go floor by floor and room by room, okay?"
"Roger, let's go. Be careful."
As it was, they found what they were looking for in the first building. Luke, Ben, and Diana found a room on the 4th floor that had clearly been occupied until recently. The faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, and the sliding door to the balcony was open. Luke went to the kitchen and found a pile of beans in the sink. He stuck a finger in them. Still warm.
"They were definitely here," he said.
"Come on." They met Isaac and the other 2 in the hallway, and Luke nodded to the door he'd just come out of and mouthed,
"They were in there."
He then gestured to the door at the end of the hallway marked Roof. Luke and Jamal had the 2 semi-automatics and went through first. There was no one on the roof. After they'd made sure, they all walked to the edge and looked over the river. "The tower is pretty easy to see from here. Do you think this is where they shot at us?" said Diana.
"I'm sure of it,"
said Isaac, bending over and picking up something from the rooftop and holding it up for all to see. It was a bullet casing. He handed it to Luke.
8mm,
said Luke, and sniffed it.
"That's what they fired at you."
Ben's eyes were wide.
"Who do you think it was?"
"No idea,"
said Luke.
"But based on the mess they made in that room, there was more than one."
"Not sure what they hoped to gain by shooting,"
said Isaac.
"We should report this to the colonel."
They all agreed that Luke and Isaac would head over to Concord the next day before cautiously making their way back to the Brady Sullivan. Eshman and his men made their way on foot back to the spot they'd left their transport. It was in a little town west of Manchester. General Orton had picked it for its proximity to Concord and the fact that it was well away from the main arterial roads. It was a fluke that it was close to Manchester, a part of the Concord expansion they hadn't been aware of when they began their mission. Now it was a little too close for comfort, and even though he would have liked to have monitored the small offshoot in Manchester for another 24 hours, it was out of the question now. Giuliano and his reckless actions on the roof had seen to that. Still, they had enough intel to take back. Eshman was sure General Orton would be quite interested in what they'd learned about Manchester. Something told him when they finished with Concord, it mightn't be in a fit state to be the first choice for their first New Hampshire outpost. Yes, Eshman did not doubt that young Bruno would have more than enough shooting in his near future. That's if he wasn't summarily shot after Eshman made his report to the general and president.